ahead and get started.
Okay.
My name is Julie Bunke. I'm the Assistant Director for Material Culture here at the Kalamazoo Valley Museum.
Ooh, I don't know if you're getting any culture here, but
If you would like to please introduce yourself and then spell your last name for us.
okay, is it on? My name is John Logan, L-O-G-A-N.
Okay, great. Well, we're happy to have you here with us today. We're going to talk a
Thank
little
you.
bit about Checker. We're going to kind of start at the beginning. Now, did you grow up here in Kalamazoo, or what brought you to
I
this
grew
area?
up in Kalamazoo. I was born in Tennessee. My father come up here to get a job. He was a molder in a foundry, and he took a freight train from Tennessee to Kalamazoo. Got a job, and probably 6 months later, he sent for my mother, myself, and my older brother. And we lived in Kalamazoo since then, Portage, Kalamazoo Portage. And after I got out of school, I bummed around and run a pool room and so on. And went to work where my father worked at the foundry. And it was dirty, hard work. And I quit and went to Checker Motors.
And what year was that?
I started in assembly at Checker Motors in '62. And less than a year later, I was laid off because they went on a strike. The union did. So I couldn't sit around with 2 children. So I went back to the foundry until late in '63. Went back to Checker as an inspector. And in '65, I took a job as assistant foreman. Worked my way up until general foreman in 1970. It was 5 years. I was assistant foreman up in the trim shop. That's where the whole interior was built for the car, all the windows. Sheet metal was not on it. The doors were on, but the sheet metal was put on later. Just come out of the paint shop, it went into 29, and the car was interior finished. And after 5 years as a foreman up there, I took a general foreman's job at the same place. Worked there for 5 years, went to assistant superintendent. A few years later, took the general superintendent's job. And in '86, I moved into engineering and retired out of engineering in 1999, January. Pardon me.
37 years with Checker?
Oh, if you add the first of it's 40, just about 40 years, yeah. The few years I was there before they went on strike, a few months really. And I got to know Mr. Markham, David's father, Morris. He was a gentleman. He was a real gentleman. He wore everyone spoke of it, he wore a cologne that was, you could smell him coming, in other words.
I've heard that. We had another interviewer. He said the exact same thing.
Yeah, but he was just a smart fella. I'll give you an example. When we first come up with the safeguard petition, that's a petition behind the front seat, because some of the drivers in Chicago were getting robbed, some shot. So we had to have a bulletproof petition. So the first one, I and a trimmer that worked for me in the trim shop put it together. It was thin metal at the time, all trimmed out nicely in the back. And we were building it over an experimental and putting it in the car. And Mr. Markham come by, Morris, what are you doing? He said. Explained to him, it was a bulletproof petition. He says, have they shot it yet? Meaning, had you tested it yet? We said, no. He said, shoot it. We sent it down to Miller Borman. They shot it and it failed. So he didn't want to put all that labor in it, not knowing whether it was good or not. Smart man.
Sure.
So later we went to a bulletproof aluminum over a 1/4 inch thick, and we had that tested right away.
Oh, yeah. And it worked?
Oh yeah, and it had a sliding window in it, was Lexan plastic. That was bulletproof.
Okay.
So we built those for years for mainly Chicago, but any other cab company that ordered them.
Sure.
So that's just an example of how Mr. Markham, we called him, was thinking all the time, and why put the labor in something if you haven't proved it.
Definitely.
That's just one of the examples
Sure.
of him. You didn't see him very often. He'd come out in the plant once in a while when we're doing something new, and everyone looked up to him. I mean, they did to David too, but David, his son, was one of the guys, more or less. I mean, he was the boss, and he'd let you know occasionally. But in fact, an example of that is I was assistant superintendent, and he called me over one day and he says, I bought an MG in England. He says, I want you to put it together. So I says, sure, got plenty of help. Well, when I got to Checker, there was a frame and the rest was in baskets. So
No instructions.
it was all wooden framed as far as doors. All the body was wood with metal on it. Well, it took a while, but we built it, and he drove it. British Racing Green. We got tired of that, and we painted it yellow. And it's still in existence. Bob Chamberlain, who worked in experimental, bought it, and he still got it.
Neat.
But David had projects, you know what I mean? And he would let us do things if we didn't interfere with production. So I had a little Volkswagen, and my wife says it's the most expensive Volkswagen Checker ever built. But both my kids learned to drive with it. It was just a bug, and I wish I'd have brought pictures of it, but things like that. We could paint our own cars and stuff like that.
Now, of all the jobs you held at Checker, which was your favorite?
Oh, I loved the trim shop when I was up there. We had a lot of women working up there. I mean, the car come in just a body with nothing, and when it went down the ramp, it was built. I mean, it was beautiful. And we built some custom limos that everyone's forgotten about. We built one for Bishop Sheen. We built one for John McEnroe. And we built one for a lady comedian, I don't think of her name, but they were plush. They were full petition, all power windows, even the petition. They were black vinyl for the driver and Bedford cord for the back seat, which had an armrest, radio built in the back seat, and controls for the heater and by air conditioning. They were plush. They were as nice as a Cadillac. But we'd only build maybe 2 a year for certain people. They were expensive, but they were a lot less than a Cadillac.
Sure.
Anyway, I liked it up there. But superintendent was a good job when things were under control. You know what I mean?
Sure.
We took a job from General Motors, Flint Metal Fab. It was the F-car frame, which is the Camaro Firebird. We went over and looked it over and got all their equipment, and we shipped them to Van Nuys, California when they were built. But we took plant 1 and had to use the whole plant for that. We built 1,250 a shift, 2 shifts a day, sometimes Saturdays. It was a big selling car from 1977 to 82. And they changed models, and our people quoted on the new one, but it was too high and someone else got it. You know, you had a lot of competition. People wanted a job like that because that was a moneymaker. And you have some other parts in here that Checker built. There, I see you even got the little sink. One time when the union was on strike, I run that in the press room in the draw die. Yeah, all of us had to work because challenged the company that we sent that to. They had to have parts.
Yeah.
So all the supervisors and all the people in the office worked during the strikes.
Hold on one second.
Fire sprinkler guy.
Oh, yeah,
company.
okay, okay.
He actually had that painted afterwards, and he had Rick Dyer from Dyer Automotive, the bodywork place, painted that up so it looked like an original. Okay.
It's neat.
Okay. So, what do you think it is about Checker autos that make it so endearing to people?
So enduring?
Yeah.
Well, probably one of the biggest things is the fact that it's not built anymore. But there's not a car built that has a room. I mean, you'd have to go to a minivan or a van to get the room that Checker had. And that's with the regular rear seat. We built some with a forward rear seat. The regular rear seats, we put jump seats in most of them, so you had 2 extra passengers. So you could put 5 people in the back, and the cab drivers loved that.
Sure.
You know, every fare is
Extra
money in the bank, you know.
Mhm.
But enduring, now that they're gone, I belong to this Checker Motors Cars Club is the name of it. And he has only been at it a few years. Joe Fay is the fellow's name. And I get email every day. People just love them. They're looking for them. And they're hard to find. I'd love to have another one. In fact, I got a little drawing here of what I want to do to one. You probably won't think it's very sharp, but I want to make a 2-door out of it.
Hey, it's like a roadster. Oh, neat.
Just cut the back door out, and
Sure.
there's a bunch more. But you don't want to pay $14,000 for a car and then start cutting on it, you know?
I've heard stranger things that people have done.
In fact, well, you had Christopher here.
Yeah.
Did he talk about the ones he has?
Yes, he did. Yeah.
The one for 125,000?
Oh, no, that I didn't know. Was that one of the limousines that he?
No, this is it's a 120-inch A12. When the 305 V8 engine come out, we put one in that car, and it hadn't been approved in that car. So it couldn't be sold, it couldn't be driven. So they drove it around the shop a little bit. I think it's maybe got 50 miles on it.
Okay.
And I heard or seen on the network, on the computer, he has it for sale for 125,000.
Wow.
I'll see, he'll sell it.
Hey, there's a market out there, definitely.
Well, you know, it's just pristine. It's no rust, no chips, no anything.
Was
It's,
that considered a prototype then? The one that he
no,
has?
it was a regular A12, but it just had that 305 engine in it, and there wasn't a big market for the A12 V8, and so I don't think Checker pursued getting it approved by the government, and so we didn't make only that one.
Yeah. Neat.
Anyhow,
Do you have a favorite style of Checker that you like?
oh yeah, the A12, A12E. As I told you, that that Aerobus, we quit making the 6-door Aerobus because the sales were not that good. We built the 8-door Aerobus, used to be built over in Plant 1, had a crew over there. We'd weld the frame in Plant 2, ship it over there, and all the body parts were shipped over there, and we had a crew building them when I first started there. In fact, I used to inspect those. And then we decided, why not put it on the Checker line? So it would take up 2 spaces. We had to do a little rework on some of the guards when it went around a corner. The back end would swing way out, so we had to change the guards. But for the last years we built it on the line, which was a lot cheaper because you didn't have a crew building it by hand. They would go from station to station, and people that built the regular car would build that. But that was a favorite until it had the wagon rear end, you know, the windows and the tailgate and so on. Well, we weren't building that many wagons, and parts were getting expensive, so we quit building the wagon in late 74. So we didn't build any in 75, Aerobuses. So in a staff meeting one morning, John Love, who was the vice president of sales, he said, we need a 15-passenger aerobus. And me being not bashful, I said, why don't we build one? Well, what do you mean? I said, we can put the 129-inch wheelbase, rear end on it, with a big door, jump seats in the back, that gives you 15 seats. Well, David was all ears, Mr. Markham. He said, well, build one, or show me a picture. So I had a picture. I've got it hanging in my basement with my checker stuff. And showed him the picture, and he said, build one. So we built 46 in 1975 and 60 in 1976.
Okay.
Or 76 and 70, one or
Now,
the other.
who did those appeal to? Was it mainly
Oh,
school
airports.
Oh, airports, okay.
But I'll tell you a funny story. You want to hear stories. The prototype we built, we had to extend the big long frame anyway, another 9 inches because that big door. So we got it built, went over to Experimental, and Experimental finished up some of the, make sure the doors were fit and so on. And they said to the ladies working in the office, we got to have a place for the luggage, so they built a roof rack. They had the ladies come in, 15 of them, with a suitcase with clothes in it. They put them up on the roof rack, all the luggage. 15 people got in, closed the doors. The car went like that, and none of the doors would open. They would. So I always thought it was funny, but we had to reinforce that frame really good.
Sure.
So every frame after that had a lot of angle iron welded on the bottom of those frames, so it'd be rigid and stiff.
Sure.
But that's just to me, it's a funny story. To engineering, it wasn't funny.
It's funny now, probably at
Yeah.
the time it was a little sore spot.
Yeah, that's true. That's
Yeah.
true. Yeah, there's stories. One I mentioned to you about David and the MG
Mm-hmm.
called me over when I was assistant plant superintendent at the time. And he says, I bought an MG. I want you to put it together. I said, okay. He said, it'll be here in about a week. So we got a frame, metal frame come in, and about 6 or 8 baskets, the rest of the parts. The doors were, all the frames were wooden. In fact, all the body was wood and metal put over it. Well, after about 6 months with making all the wood twice, first time it wouldn't work, we finished it, painted it British racing green, and he loved it. He loved it. A couple years later, we painted it yellow.
Yellow, okay.
And then it just sat. He sold it to one of the workers in cab service.
Now, did you personally own any Checker autos?
Just the one they built for me in 1980, and that was brand new. I mentioned it before. I built it the way I wanted it, the trim I wanted in it, vinyl roof. It had the opera windows in the back, and I loved it. Oh, I just loved it. We went to Florida, I think, 3 times in it, and that's a trip because everywhere you stop, this was in 1980, and there weren't many of them around these little towns. Chicago was full of them, naturally. And a fella come up to me, I always remembered, he said, what is that, a Plymouth? I said, no, it's a Checker Motors built in Kalamazoo. He said, oh, a Plymouth. Oh, I wasn't going to argue with him. But anyway, I had another one. I traded a fella that worked at Checker, I don't know what I traded, motorcycle, I think. And I finished it. It was pop riveted, a lot of the places, like the pillars to the sills, because he didn't have a welder. And I think I had it painted at Checker, and my son, he drove it for 2 or 3 years. And I sold it. It was in good shape. But that's it as far as Checkers. I always wanted another one. I'll get one.
Oh, yeah. Very good.
Fix my cord here.
Did I screw it up?
No, you didn't screw up. I just kind of came out from behind there. That's fine. I just don't want you to catch your
okay.
arm on it.
Next.
So you said you retired in 1999. What was it like from the time that they stopped producing the taxis in 82 to 1999? What was the working
Oh my,
atmosphere?
we filled the place up with work. The line, the checker line that run from the frame through the body up to paint down to through 29, which was the trim shop. Downstairs they put the front end on. There was a bunch of pits where people had to work underneath. Those were all filled in. And then we'd put, like in 28, we got door assembly lines from General Motors, and we put them right in there. The M-van door, that was my last project in engineering, to have all the tooling built. And over in Plant 1, I told you we put the F-frame over there, F-car frame, Camaro Firebird. And that was the biggest job we ever had. That was, whew. In fact, after it was welded, it went through a washer hanging on a conveyor to clean it, and then it went through a dip tank, which was called hot melt wax. It was black wax. In other words, if a stone or something hit that frame, it would heal itself. It wouldn't just stay bare metal to rust. Well, anyways, we built $1,250 a shift, 2 shifts a day. In fact, I went over to Mott Community College with a general foreman I was going to put on that job to learn wire welding, because we only had a little bit of wire welding at the time at Checker, on the Checker frames and so on. So we were over there a week to learn wire welding, and we're going to teach employees. Well, I wasn't going to teach anyone, he was. But anyway, we had young fellows that would stand over those wire welders 8 hours a day, 1,250 of them. And it was all production. Each person would do a certain amount of that frame. And that whole frame was built at Checker, except there was a cross member, we bought it, that held the transmission up, but it was bolted on the frame, wasn't welded. The rest of it was all welded, and we built it all. Made it in the press room, shipped it over to Plant 2, and that was the biggest job we ever had. In 1975, General Motors, 1982, they changed models, and we quoted on it and didn't get it. But that was probably the best job Checker ever had.
What do you think were some of the things that led to Checker going out of business?
Oh, competition. In fact, we used to, when I started there, we were using, I'll think of it in a minute, an engine, flathead engine. Went to General Motors engines for years and years, and General Motors, we weren't building enough to make it well worth it for them. That's what I heard. So we kind of phased out they phased out the Checker. That was a sad day. I give you that last one.
Oh, sure.
That was sad to
Yeah.
come off the end of that line. And we had, every car would come off at the end of the line. It was built, the engine was timed, the front end was aligned. The last thing was to align the headlights. Then it went out the door. The inspectors, which I did, would drive them around the racetrack, we call it, twice. They'd come in the back door and go on a repair line. Any fitting of doors, hood, deck lid, anything, wiring, anything that needed repair. And then it went around a circle, flat top we called it, into a paint booth if it needed touching up, then out the door, and then they stored them or shipped them. But I had that job driving them around, and that was interesting. It was fun.
Christopher Markin was telling us that you would drive over railroad.
Railroad ties, yeah.
ties?
Yeah, you go about 2/3 of the way around, and then they had railroad ties sticking up just to check for rattles. And you didn't go 50 mile an hour over there, but you know, you might shake a door off or something. But yeah, and then if it rattled, the inspectors, which I was at the time, I drove every other car around, had a guy working with me, and we'd go in the back door and then write it up. put it on the windshield, and the repairman would fix it until it went through that touch-up booth and ship it.
Neat. Very nice.
Fun.
Do you keep in touch with any former coworkers from Checker?
We have a monthly breakfast with management people. The people that started it this years ago, before I retired, Steve Wilson was one. He was vice president of sales, purchasing, I'm sorry. Become a real good friend, played a lot of golf with him. He started a club, him and some other guys, and everyone could come, the union people that were retired. And when I retired, I started going to that, and I tell you, you couldn't hear yourself think.
So many people.
And then after Checker went out of business, I mean, quit making cars, it'd be 150 people there all talking at once. So we decided to have just the management people have breakfast together. So we went over on Portage Road, Portage Street, and it's still going on. But like last month, there was 6 of us there. So people lose interest, you know.
Sure.
But it's kind of fun getting together with them.
Yeah. Any last thoughts that you'd like to share with us, or any stories that you can think of Checker?
Well, Chris was here yesterday. You know, I think I mentioned this to you. Him and John, his older brother, were this high. And once in a while on Friday afternoon, David would call me and tell me to leave my golf cart unlocked. I had a golf cart because I had to cover 3 plants. And I'd leave it unlocked and they would come in and play around with it. Well, I happened to be in there one Saturday and they were over by the paint service line. We'd like ship thousands of fenders to Chicago because they were wrecking them. And we'd prime them there and paint them on the service line. And there's fenders hanging there, and they're just, you know, bare metal. I mean, and it was scary for those kids to be around, driving a golf cart around that thing. And I mentioned it to David, and they know what they're doing, he said. And they did. They never got hurt. But I worried more than he did.
Sure, sure.
Yeah, that's one experience. I met David's daughter. Gosh, I can't think of her name. She worked for the cab company that he owned in New York, in the office. And she had anorexia or something. She passed away. And another son was in New York. He fell through a roof. They were playing Frisbee on in a big building in New York, and killed himself. So David he's had some sorrow in his life. A few divorces and such as that. But a good guy. Sorry to hear him pass away. Yeah, he was at times, like I said, just one of the guys, you know. But when he'd get mad, he'd get mad. He had a lot of responsibility. They owned a lot of cabs, and he was gone a lot of the time.
Well, he had a lot of people working for him, so that is a huge responsibility, I guess.
Oh, that's right. Every
Yeah.
cab, over the guys over in Chicago, I don't know how many thousand cabs they had over there. He owned Checker and Checker Yellow. That was one of the companies, and then one just like it, only yellow, different company, run by different people, but he was the boss. And there was people robbing the cab drivers. There were people stealing the cabs. I mean, it's a lot of responsibility for any business, but that one would be tough, I think. Because Chicago, with those people over there,
That can be a pretty
they don't
tough
care if
place,
they
yeah.
live or die. you
Yeah,
know.
exactly. Well, anything else you'd like to share with us?
Well, when I retired, I started collecting Checker things. People send them, and I wish I had a video of my basement. I've got a bunch of stuff that I started with a basement door, just put decals on it, a hood emblem, and then I rebuilt the basement after we moved there, and I got 3 8-foot shelves that I got Checker stuff on. a couple of meters. In fact, Christopher gave me 2 meters, had them painted and so on. Taxi meter, you know, where they had the flag on it, and just other things. A lot of little checkers that people sell and so on. But you know, it was a large part of my life for a lot of years.
Definitely.
And
And you've got your watch, your retirement
Yeah,
watch that you're wearing.
that was nice of them. They come to me and said, what kind of watch you want? I said, I want a Seiko. And back then they didn't have any that was run by light, so this is just self-winding, but I only wear it for special occasions. This is one.
It looks nice. I noticed it right
Yeah,
away.
I only
when you
wore
walked in.
it 4 or 5 times in the
That's
last
good.
16 years.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
Well, you should wear it more. It looks good.
Yeah, it does. I like it. But every watch I got, they're all scratched up because I'm
Yeah.
always
Oh, sure.
working on the tractor or doing something, you know.
Sure.
Got to do something. When you're retired, it's a long day. Can't play golf every day.
No, not every day, especially in Michigan. Okay, well, thank you so much for joining us.
Well, I enjoy
Appreciate
being
it.
here. It's a nice little display you have here.
Thank you.
This is permanent?
This will be up through the end of August, and then we'll move on to our next display.
Oh.
Prior to this, we had a display in Gibson.
Oh,
So
yeah.
we're trying to highlight, you know, some of the
Oh,
businesses
yeah, some of the
that really
business.
put Kalamazoo on the map, and it did so much to promote our town and the people who worked there. And
We used to have our Checker Car Club meeting. We'd go out to Gilmore.
Oh, nice.
And when Checker closed, they got a lot of Checker paperwork and so.
Mhm.
And I had a bunch of paperwork up until last Thursday. In fact, Joe Fay started a new Checker Club a few years ago. It's got over 800 members. It's doesn't charge anyone anything. It's on Facebook, and I get probably 10 to 20 emails every day. Facebook, sending it to most of the members. You know, it's neat.
Do you have people who are restoring checkers that go to that page and ask for
Oh yeah, a lot of parts.
Um,
Yep, yep.
information or where they
Oh
can
yeah,
get
every
parts?
day. Every day there's somebody wanting something. I think today was speedometer head. They couldn't find one, and someone answered it that one would replace it. And, you know, there's a lot of knowledge out there. Because if you have one and can't get parts, what do you do?
Sure,
You either make them or you find them somehow.
sure.
So yeah, it's quite a club. It took the place of this club. This club, first thing they could do is move out of Kalamazoo, and that's when it just rubbed me wrong because the birthplace of Checker. I mean,
Sure.
why move?
Sure.
But-
Okay.
No, I'm not a member of that one any longer.
Well, thank you for your time.
Well, thank you for listening.
All right.
If I got a ticket out there, I'm going to bring it to you.
Very good. We'll pay it for you.